Semester number 1, lesson number 39. Our aim today is how was the growth of business affected by industrialization? And before we start, I want you to critically think, what type of transportation did you use to get to school this morning? Are there any other options you could have used that make sense? And just kind of keep that in mind. We'll talk about that more in class tomorrow. Today we're going to start talking about industrialization, which is really going to lead us into some of the stuff that you're learning about in English class and some of your other classes dealing with the progressive era. And when we talk about industrialization today, we're going to look at the rise of American business, industry, and labor. And just to review before we move on, the era of Reconstruction was the rebuilding of the South after the Civil War. And there was civil rights versus segregation, right? There was the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which gave African Americans equal rights under federal law. However, in the South, they found ways around those laws, including the Black Codes and the Jim Crow laws, which limited African American rights in certain states. When we look at Northern industrial development, one of the big things that brings about this industrial development is the Transcontinental Railroad. The Transcontinental Railroad connects the eastern and western parts of the country. Really connects the west and east coast. All right, it's the first, continuous rail that connects these two parts of the country, and it makes transportation and travel between the east and west coast easier. And obviously, people are going to continue to move west in great numbers. It also obviously increases trade and transportation, and it starts to really make America one, where all parts of the country are connected. The rise of big business. When we look at the rise of big business, we have to look at a few different things. First, there's the change in the types of business owner. All right, you have the sole proprietor, single owner corporations. You have the capital that's needed to start that, right? Money. In order to start a business, you need capital or money. And when we talk about really our big focus in class this year are corporations, businesses in which many investors own shares. All right, if the company does good, investors make money. If not, the investors lose money. And a perfect example of that is McDonald's. We'll talk about that more in class. But when we talk about like a sole proprietor or partnership, that's really one or two people that own like a family business. That's very different than a McDonald's or whatnot. But that kind of leads us into what we really want to look at starting today is early business. And early business was dominated by small groups of men. And what their goal was to eliminate competition. And the problem with eliminating competition is if you eliminate competition, you have control of the market, meaning you create the prices, right? A monopoly is a company or small group of companies that has complete control over a particular field of business. They are allowed to they allowed company to control price. This allowed the company to control prices, and it hurt the consumer. If you think about this, imagine there was only one gasoline company, and they had no competition. All right, would they be charging $2 for a gallon of gas or $8 for a gallon of gas? All right, some monopolies are allowed today. When we talk about monopolies that are allowed today, we're talking about gas, not gasoline, but we're talking about like natural gas that goes into your house for heating, water, electricity, and metro. And we'll talk more about that and why that happens tomorrow. Trusts are a group of corporations in the same field controlled by one person or board of directors. That's also a problem, right? Trusts and monopolies are basically the same thing. When one group of people controls an entire industry in any way, they're not going to give you the fairest prices, and therefore the consumer is going to be hurt. Remember, it all goes back to the people, right? The people should have the best options available. And in monopolies and trusts, they do not because there are no choices. There's only one choice. We'll talk more about that tomorrow in class. There are plenty of questions you could think about on this topic, so please have one developed for tomorrow. All right. Our check for understanding. The main reason competing corporations often combine resources is to A, create a monopoly over the production and distribution of goods, B, avoid unreasonable restraint of trade, C, reduce the price of goods to benefit consumers, or D, increase personal contacts with employees. And we'll go over that answer tomorrow in class. Have a good night.